the first ever Facebook Live event for ISCS, the International Society of Exposure Science. I am Paloma Beamer. I am the president of ISCS, and I have Leslie Ann Quiros Acala here with me today as well, and she's secretary for ISCS. Today we wanted to focus on answering any and all questions related to being a mom during this COVID pandemic. We know lots of people have questions, lots of people have been asking us our advice. But first and foremost, lots of people ask us, what is an exposure scientist? What is it that you do? And how does this relate to the COVID pandemic? So, Leslie Ann, what is it you do?
So, hi everyone and welcome. And Paloma and I are both excited to be here with you. We will, like she said, we'll try to answer all the questions we can. And to set the stage, what is exposure science and what do we do? So, exposure science is basically the study of our contact, such as swallowing, breathing, or touching, with environmental factors and their effects on the human body. What do I mean by environmental factors? I mean chemicals that could be in our foods, like in processed foods, or pesticides, preservatives. It could also be chemicals in our household, like cleaners or personal care products that we use. Environmental factors can be physical, such as noise and radiation, as well as biological, as is the case of COVID-19, which is a virus. And so research basically in our field aims to determine the different types, levels, and combinations of how these exposures can come into contact with people and how they can affect human health, as well as increase our risk to disease over a lifetime. And why is exposure science important right now? Well, like Dr. John Levy said, one of our members as well, until we have a vaccine, we have to rely on exposure science. Exposure science is it's going to not only inform the decisions of how do we properly reopen businesses, and make sure they're really safe, but it also informs decisions such as, what kind of personal protective equipment we should be wearing, such as masks, gloves, or anything else that we need, depending on the scenario and situation that we're in. It also informs decisions on, for example, on what chemicals we should be using or not using to disinfect, while also taking into account the potential human health effects that can occur as a result of this. And also, Paloma, feel free to interrupt me at any time if I forget something.
I was going to say, a lot of people know what epidemiologists are and what they do, but what I like to do is explain that epidemiologists link exposure with disease.
Yes.
Or try to understand how we're actually exposed and then how we can control or intervene on those exposures. So both Leslie Ann and I are engineers, and that's how we came to this field, was trying to think about how to minimize our exposures in different ways. So, we are both moms who just happen to be exposure scientists, but we have to make decisions for our families and our kids every day. And so we knew that other moms probably are trying to get through and make these decisions, and we wanted to, provide our perspectives. So one of the questions we got was, and I'm going to throw it to you, Leslie Ann, does 6 feet apart really work?
So does the 6 feet apart really work? Let me backtrack a little bit and tell you a little bit more about why is it 6 feet? Where did that come from? The 6 feet depends, it's based on studies that have shown how far virus particles can travel, and depending on their size and how long they'll stay essentially airborne. 6 feet is a guideline, so if at all possible, you should do a little bit more, but that's like the absolute minimum if I were to look at it that way. But it's also up to us, I think in addition to the 6 feet, you should be wearing masks whenever possible, and the scenario calls for it as well, and whenever possible. The physical distancing is going to help and minimize our risk of transmission.
Right, so I think that's a really good reminder. So the primary concern right now is inhaling air of an infectious person. And the majority of those droplets or aerosols will drop out within 6 feet, but it doesn't necessarily mean at 5 feet, 9 inches you're not safe, and at 6 feet, 4 inches you are safe. It's just a probability of risk, but we want to minimize that, and then we all want to do our part wearing that face mask to protect others, right? That's what we can do to try to minimize, take care of each other in this process, because we're basically, stopping the exposure as close as possible to the source. If we happen to be infectious and didn't know that we are. You know, another important perspective to think about is that every time we get in a car, there's a risk. There's nothing we can do in this scenario to completely eliminate the risk, just like we can't completely eliminate the risk every time we get in a car, but we can put on our seatbelt, we can take a driving test, we can drive below the speed limit, we can do all these things to minimize the risk of driving in the car, and that's what we're thinking about here as well. So what about surfaces? How important are those?
How important are, sorry, say that again?
What about touching other surfaces or things like that? How important is that?
So we want to stress the primary route of exposure to the virus right now is through inhalation, but that's not to say that there could be, secondary exposure from touching contaminated surfaces. It's less likely, but we cannot rule that out at this point. Because a virus can survive on different, depending on the surface material, it can survive a different amount of time. So always use, proper hand washing practices and hygiene practices at all times as well.
Right now here in Arizona, our spikes have, we have a huge spike, and so we're pretty much not going anywhere. I've kept my kids home. But if we do go to the grocery store or something like that, we come back and wash everyone's hands. I disinfect all the surfaces as soon as I put all the groceries away. But, other than that, we're not going out too much right now. What about you guys? Are you?
Same here. And that is a rule. As soon as they get home, they pretty much change clothes and bathe, and allow hand washing as well. Likewise. And I am trying to follow social distancing as much as possible, and no play dates at home for now for us. At least that's what I'm following at home. There have been occasional social distance bike rides in the neighborhood, but that's very rare. And I make sure that the kids are far enough away from each other. But other than that, no close contact.
Yeah. I do live in a neighborhood that's designed. It's a co-housing community, so it's designed for the kids to hang out all the time together and play together, and so yeah, we let them ride their bikes together. That's one of the big things. But what about swimming pools? That's a whole nother.
So that's a great question. The CDC has come up with some guidelines, and if you're thinking about going to public pools, definitely look on their websites and even call them to see what kind of precautions they're taking. With regards to the social distancing and what are they doing to disinfect surfaces, including railings, their bathroom facilities, slides if there's any slides. So definitely look up what they're doing because they should be taking proper precautions. There should be signage. There should be announcements every so often reminding people of social distancing. In terms of we hear this a lot about wear your mask, wear your mask, wear your mask. Which, by the way, we totally do here. Obviously, you're not going to wear a mask inside the swimming pool, right? Because that could, that's going to make it harder to breathe. But once you're outside the pool, definitely still practice social distancing. I would not share any swimming gear, especially with those who are not in your household, right? Like whether it's a snorkeling mask, goggles, inner tubes, like any kind of objects like that, I would not share them. Let's see what else. And I would still, again, take proper precautions as to, a lot of hand washing. If for whatever reason you're out of sanitizer, you can make your own with isopropyl alcohol and aloe vera, which I have done actually at home, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when you couldn't find any sanitizer, or the one I found was like $20. So there's definitely precautions that you can take. And different communities, different counties are going to take different actions. There are some that are going to try to physically distance people in the swimming pool by putting up lanes, limiting the amount of people in them. So don't assume. So ask before you go what kind of precautions the facilities are taking.
One of the things, though, that because we have a shared pool here that I pointed out to our neighbors here, too, is the good thing about a pool is it's a really large bleach bath, essentially. So the virus isn't likely to transfer in the water.
Right.
long as the chlorine levels are maintained. Here we check ours twice a day, and we keep a log so I can go check them actually before I even put the kids in the pool. But we have reopened our communal pool. We're trying to keep it to less than 10 people at a time. It's a pretty large pool, so with that, we can maintain the 6 feet and the kids can cool off, because it is 110 this week. And those sorts of things. But we've also been trying to think of like what are other creative games that we can allow the kids to do from a distance. The one was we bought all the kids in the neighborhood, and then we ended up buying all the adults large super soakers, and had a big splash out on a big lawn that we have in between all of our houses. You could probably do that in a park. Certain ways like that where you can allow the kids to still play but not be on top of each other.
There's another question that came in, and I wanted to just read it live to you guys. I read that that they are finding children under 10 are considered safe. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't read that anywhere, but I think the concern is even if they contracted it and are asymptomatic carriers, they could expose others. There have been kids coming in New York, especially where they saw kids who are coming down with Kawasaki's disease. And my understanding is that might be a reaction to the antibody itself and not the virus. It's really rare. We're learning a lot more about Kawasaki's disease now than we had known previously. But I would still be very concerned about kids, and I wouldn't consider them safe under the age of 10. I don't know. Hussein, what do you think?
I completely agree. To me, I always like to err on the side of caution. And like Paloma said, somebody can be asymptomatic, meaning that they have the virus, but they're not showing any symptoms. But that doesn't mean that they still can't transmit the disease. They're still carriers. They can still serve as a vector and transmit it to somebody else. So I would not assume that kids under 10 are okay and that they cannot transmit the virus.
Because we're here in Arizona, we have camps are open, daycare's open, but I still haven't enrolled my older son in camp, and my little one, my 1-year-old, his daycare opened on May 11th, and I haven't taken him back yet. And that was before our cases spiked over the last 2 weeks. I was keeping an eye on those caseloads, trying to decide when I was going to take him back. But with our current caseload, I would want to see a 14-day decrease in cases before I even consider putting my kid in camp or at daycare.
Agreed.
I think that segues nicely into one of the other questions, which is related to school in the fall. So one specific one was, will deep cleaning schools really help so we can send our kids back to school this fall? And also, I guess, what are some of the major challenges you think are going to be faced with returning to school?
I'll start and then you can jump in? Yeah, sure. So deep cleaning is not enough, right? If we're referring to a deep cleaning, like let's deep clean it now and then open it up in the fall and not worry about it, that's not going to solve anything, right? It has to be routine cleaning and disinfecting. We have to be careful of what is being used in the schools. We have to keep in mind that our children are a vulnerable population, and exposures when they're little can have a lasting impact on their health, depending on what they're exposed to. So this is something that we have to keep in mind. There's also the social distancing that's going to still need to be, in my humble opinion, still required. The wearing of masks. Then there's the scenarios of like, okay, then kids have recess, and how do we have them not playing with each other so close? So I think we have a lot of challenges that we are all thinking about. I don't think that there's somebody who has figured out the solution. And I think that's why we still haven't heard from a lot of our schools, and how some might be reopening, but we don't know what they're exactly going to put into place regarding that. And also, it's very important, for example, that they have a good ventilation system, so that it's not a potential way to get exposed as well. So there's a lot of factors that come into play, not just deep cleaning the school. That's not enough.
Yeah, if we were to think about the hierarchy controls, right, which NIOSH and OSHA both promote for how to implement exposure controls. I mean, the first thing is elimination, which is closing down the schools. But if we are to reopen the schools and we reduce the number of kids at one time that are in each classroom in order to maintain social distancing, I've heard, that maybe some kids would go on certain days, others on other days, or staggered schedules. But we would really want to think about how to keep kids as socially distanced as possible. And then next, is the ventilation. Also, I saw from Korea, it looked like they put up plexiglass barriers around the kids' desks. That could be something to consider. I don't know if school districts have the ability to do that or will be able to afford that, but that would be something else to consider. And then I just read our draft guidelines here for our local school, and I'm still having to kind of think through it because they're not going to enforce face masks in kids under sixth grade. And so thinking about how I feel about that, I'm going to have to sit with that for the next few days and think about it, because I know at the university we're trying to push to have face masks worn indoors at all times, not just when social distancing is impossible, but at all times. And we would like to see that, I think, in the schools, but understanding that there's certain age groups that are going to be really hard to keep them with that such a big behavioral change, and that could be a lot of work for the teachers to have to enforce.
No other live questions right now, but one other one that we had, which is a little unrelated to schools, but I think it is interesting, is that NFL coaches right now are very unhappy about the restrictions that are being placed on them, and they've indicated that it's unrealistic. And I feel like there's probably a lot of people who say it's unrealistic, or how can we get to that new normal? So what is your take on that I guess outlook? How to respond to that?
I guess I haven't kept up on the NFL, so can you tell us what restrictions they're doing?
I think it's just very similar to, socially distancing at practice. And I think this could actually be really important for those out there who have kids involved in group athletics and sports. And what are the certain things they should be doing as they return back to that?
Yeah, I think it's still a question to be determined. I thought about letting my son do the soccer camp that's open, but as we thought through, it's really hard to maintain that 6 feet while playing soccer. And they're breathing hard, they're doing lots of things like that. So when you're breathing hard, you're more likely to have viruses coming out, so they're more likely to be at faster velocities and accelerations, and more likely to be traveling farther, even if you're outdoors, but you're all on top of each other because you're chasing the same ball. I'm not sure that we know enough yet on how to resume that safely for kids. It's something for us to keep thinking about, because we know our kids need social activities right now. I mean, I think that's the hardest thing, is that they're really feeling socially isolated. They would like to do sports again. My older son participated in a running club this spring, and it was all virtual, so it was me taking him to the park and timing him, running a mile and then inputting it. That's not the same, right? So hopefully they can think of a way for the fall running club where that can still be done by maintaining social distance in a way where kids could go run together. But I think we need to think through each one of these. Again, how do we minimize the number of people within the same 6-foot bubble? How do we ensure, good hand hygiene and surface disinfection on things that will be touched by multiple people, so that we can let our kids start going back out and doing things. I know here in Arizona, they brought the athletes back to campus, but with it being 110 degrees, all their practices are indoors. And so, there's concerns about how to do that safely and working with athletics as well.
I agree with that one. As a parent, as a mom, we had the opportunity to have my son go back to soccer practice following some social distancing rules where, the parents were even asked to stay in their cars and kind of let their kids go, and then the coach was going to, have them 6 feet, at least 6 feet apart. But I I did not feel comfortable yet with that, and so we decided to kind of forego that for now. So, and this was not long ago, and so my level of comfort was not there to allow that, but I felt more comfortable with, like, for example, a bike ride out where they don't need to be that close to each other, right? Whereas like a contact sport like soccer, you need to kind of be close to, take the ball away, etc. And so I'm there with you.
So we've received another question about transportation. So how could we make buses safe for the kids that rely heavily on public transportation?
There's a real life kid. So for school busing, I mean, I think that's going to be another one of those scenarios. We're going to want to, if the bus isn't, and we're able to alternate kids, or have the kids all sit next to the window, not have anybody on the aisle, things like that would definitely help. Definitely making sure kids are wearing face masks. Ideally, hand sanitizer on the bus as well, making sure the buses are well cleaned every day, disinfected.
And again, the social distancing, right? Like I would not sit kids next to each other or even like 1 seat apart. So it's going to be quite challenging, right? I think that's why, like I said, the schools have not sent out what they're going to be doing, because it's a lot to think through, right? It's a transportation, it's making sure that the buildings are ready to receive the kids and what kind of procedures are going to be following once everybody's in the building, etc. So,
and I think as a parent, trying to maintain, choices over things where you have control. I know not every parent can take their kids to school in their own personal vehicle, but if they can, that would be, I think, a preference. If you're able to, take turns driving the kids to school rather than having them do the bus, even though you're used to using the bus in the past, I would still do that. I know that that's not an option for everyone, but and that's one little way to minimize the number of kids who need to ride the bus. If the parents who are able to do an alternative are able to provide that, and then they're reducing their own kids' exposure.
I agree, and I think it's important to stress, I don't know whether it's like related to this exactly, but I think it's important for us to continue following the guidelines, right? Like I know that there's different, at least I'm in Maryland, and so here there's different phases of opening, right? Like phase 1, phase 2, like on tomorrow, Friday, they're going to be opening the malls, for example. I would still be cautious, just because we're reopening, it doesn't mean that there is no pandemic. It doesn't mean that we should not be taking, sorry for the background noise, be taking any precautions like wearing masks, practicing our social distancing, etc. So I think it's really important that we don't dismiss that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, just because things are being open, you should keep an eye on where your local community is and what phase they're in during the pandemic. So here in Arizona, we had most things open, middle of May, and now we're experiencing a very sharp increase, and we don't know if it's related to that or to graduation or other things that have transpired. But just because restaurants are open for dine-in, just because pools are open, just because the mall is open, doesn't mean that I would, take my kids to all those places. Right now, I really look at the actual data in our state, in our county, and try to pay attention to that. So I was monitoring it after things opened up, and there was, decreasing case counts for a while there. And then they just shot up about 2 weeks ago. And for the last 2 weeks, we've been at sky-high rates, and I would consider that in pandemic phase, not surveillance phase, where I would want to see us in surveillance phase before I start considering doing more things with my children out in public. And by that, that would be decreasing case counts. That would be testing readily available with a quick turnaround. That would be active contact tracing. But we're not there yet here in Arizona, at least. And, our cases are rising, our hospitals are full. So I'm trying to acknowledge that there's widespread community transmission here locally, and we got to do our part to stay home. That may not be true in places where the rest of you all are. We just had our mayor today, put up a face mask regulation that's separate from the state. But that's just A. So you want to keep up with all the different guidelines and recommendations locally, state, federally, wherever you are.
And some other, small precautions you can take is if you have to go out to the grocery store, try to go at times where there aren't any big crowds, for example. Obviously, we know that some of us may not have that choice. You have to go, but if you can, try to take precautions when you can.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we're seeing kind of a shifting here of gears, but what are your thoughts on the launch of a vaccine? How do they test, measure, to understand what we should analyze if we do or do not vaccinate with that first vaccine that's produced? So I think that's a long way of saying, do we give our kids the first vaccine that comes out? Do we wait? And what are your thoughts on that?
This is way out of our wheelhouse. We're not vaccine researchers, so I think we should be very transparent about that. So I think, I would be looking to the guidance on that. I would discuss it with my pediatrician. I should also say that all of these things that I've made decisions about, daycare and camps, I discussed with my pediatrician, and he gave me his opinion, and he has his own kids, and so he's wading through these issues as well. So with the vaccine, I would do the same thing, just like I've asked his advice on every other vaccine that I've given my children. As a researcher, anecdotally, we'll just have to see, how it develops for children. Some of the research on Kawasaki's disease shows that might be a reaction to the antibody for coronavirus. If that's so, and in developing immune systems, that's why it targets children. That cause some concern for children being able to take the vaccine versus so I would be paying attention to all those questions. I think it's probably more likely it's going to roll out in adults first. And unless there may be thoughts about that.
I would agree. As a scientist, I always like to look at the data and the evidence, right? What is how effective it is? What are the potential side effects? I am pro-vaccine, but for this one, I would have to see what are we seeing, right? Because we've never dealt with something like this before, where we have to make this decision. So I would have to look at the data for making decisions. So.
And part of it is probably, how comfortable you feel with your pediatrician. What I like about my pediatrician is that he, gives me an independent viewpoint. He reads through the peer-reviewed literature on his own. It's really easy in exposure science to want to wrap our kids up in a bubble because we know too much about a lot of the different chemicals and things that they're exposed to. And so I find him to be a really rational, counterpart to go to with my questions and concerns. But making sure you can have that dialogue, I think, is key. More questions for us, Caitlin?
Yeah, there is one more about vacations, actually. So what are your thoughts on travel, family travel and vacations? You see vacation rentals coming back up that are available, hotels with new policies, even renting RVs. There's an uptick in that category as well. So should we be traveling with our kids? And if so, what are, I guess, the safest precautions there?
So I guess as a mom and exposure scientist, right now I would stick to road trips if possible. I would not put my kids or my parents, for example, on a plane if I can avoid it. I would stick to road trips. With regards to staying at different places, it's funny, I just had my parents are over visiting and they drove instead of flying. And I actually told them take your own bed sheets just to be safe. Again, practice proper hygiene practices if you can, and maybe I was being a little excessive, but I was clean surfaces before you touch them. We are assuming that they are being cleaned and disinfected, which you never know, so it doesn't harm to be a little bit extra careful. Opening up windows, for example, to air out the air where you're staying, if that's possible. But for us, I think we're staying local this summer until further notice, but that's just us being a little safe. and maybe like planning trips to maybe like nearby rivers or things outdoors.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. So Elizabeth and I did write an editorial on that I think is linked to this Facebook page. But thinking through, if you're gonna stay in a hotel or you're gonna do a road trip, I would also argue for doing a road trip if possible because it gives you more control over who comes into your 6-foot bubble. To look for hotels where you would enter from the outside to your room, like an external corridor, so you're not taking elevators, you're not pressing all those common buttons from the window, you can open the door. Thinking through all those sorts of things, just like you said, disinfecting services, what kind of policies do they have? Different hotels are doing different things. If you're able to stay at an Airbnb or VRBO, looking for one that maybe does like a 1 to 2 day window between reservations, it's not likely that the virus would survive past 2 or 3 days. Even that is very unlikely, but you don't want places that are turning it over within the same day. Some hotels are also doing that with their rooms. Like, what is that overlap period or how many hours in between? Yes, so I would look for one that's a little bit more cautious and has more policies in place around that. One of the things that we don't know about, but it seems like with wastewater epidemiology being one of the sciences being used right now, that I'd be concerned about a shared bathroom. So I would love the idea of going camping, but not sure I'd want to use those shared camping bathroom facilities. If I were to, I would probably disinfect quite a bit and use hand sanitizer before and after, just in the hopes that there could be some residual effect of the hand sanitizer. I was thinking of just staying local because I was going to stay home and minimize our contact. But now with the widespread transmission here in Arizona, I'm debating whether or not I might go to California for a little while and stay in a home there. Just a way to get out of the heat and can't really go out here as easily. I feel because the guidelines aren't as strict. But these are all some of the things that I would consider for a family. An RV rental seems like a good way to control both your bathroom and your exposure and who's in your 6-foot bubble, probably more if you feel comfortable doing that. Any idea?
So, do you have any recommendations on how we can talk to our kids about the signs of COVID to help them better understand how to stay safe?
I think one of the ways that I do it is by leading by example, right? Like if I wear a mask, that means, mommy wears a mask, that means they're wearing a mask. Obviously, I try not to get them out. I don't have to. In terms of telling them about it, I have made sure to tell them, hey, this is why it's important to wear them. I have gone over explaining, what does asymptomatic mean and how people can still have the virus and may not have any symptoms, but still be carriers and be able to transmit it to somebody else and why it's important. So I've tried to basically explain the importance of the precautions that we're taking and why we need to take them. And the differences between, hey, just like a cold can be really bad in one person and not so bad in another, that's the same thing for the virus, for the coronavirus. So they're aware. And they know that they call me mommy Dr. Scientist. So they kind of follow my guidelines as well.
I'm sure your kids are used to weird rules like mine are too. Nobody else does on their children. So, there's definitely things already before coronavirus that I think I have slightly different rules than some of the other parents, and my kids are used to that. My little one, he's only 20 months, so we're just working on talking, so we haven't talked too much about coronavirus. But my older son has asked me questions and things like that. We've been talking about it a bit, but I know one of my colleagues at the College of Public Health here in Arizona, maybe Caitlin, we can add the link to it later, has put together resources on how to talk to kids, including, I think, some comic books that she developed with her kids and in their own dialogues. So we could link to some of those resources for viewers to look at later.
Great, yeah, that's a cool. So You kind of addressed this earlier, but I think a lot of people still have questions about it, which is, do they know if the virus is still transmitting by touching a contaminated surface, or has the primary concern shifted to viral transmission? Just thinking about things like taking food out safely, touching things at the store, etc.
So I think there was a lot of concern after that New England Journal of Medicine article was published that showed the virus could live on surfaces for, well, it's not really alive, but could be viable on surfaces for 2 to 3 days. And that caused a lot of concern, and perhaps people got really concerned about that surface, or what we call the fomite, is what we call it in our field, transmission. And I don't want to say that route of exposure is not important or doesn't exist. I just think that the primary route that we can control ourselves, that we need to emphasize, is this inhalation route of exposure, but we still need to be concerned about the surfaces. So what I do in my home is hand washing, hand sanitizer, hand wipe things. Before I go to the grocery store, before I take money out at the bank, I put hand sanitizer on, put it on again as soon as I leave both those places, with the hope that there might be some residual. But I'm not wiping down every item of food I bring home. I'm not soaking my fruits and vegetables in vinegar or bleach. Most of that we're still going about doing. We have been doing takeout because I'm a working mom in public health, and I'm a single mom, and so we do take out a couple times a week. And so as soon as I get, I go meet them outside, and as soon as I get the food, I take out the outside containers. All of that gets thrown out that night. But we're still ordering food. We're still eating food from takeout. In some ways, I think that might be less risky than going into a grocery store. As a single mom, I have to take my kids with me when I go to the grocery store, so I, try to minimize how often we go. Once a week, once every other week. Just get everything we can then. I don't know about you guys, Leslie. Have you guys been getting food or?
We have. I'm in the same boat as you, so we definitely have. And what I usually try to do, just as an example, if I know it's a place that usually has the food pre-made and they kind of heat it up for you, I say, you know what, don't heat it up. Put it in the container you're going to put it in, and what I do is I transfer it into my own containers when they get home and then heat them up. But we definitely still do takeout once in a while for the same reasons. So.
And my local, I've been primarily shopping at Trader Joe's, and they're super strict. Even though the guidelines have been lifted quite a bunch in Arizona, they're definitely minimizing number of people coming into the stores. They're maintaining 6-foot distancing while you wait in line to go in the store. Everybody has to have a face mask on. They can have barriers up. So, picking which grocery stores you feel are implementing more controls is interesting. I heard from my brother in California, they're giving you gloves when you walk into certain stores. We don't have that here. Some of our grocery stores have very minimal things here in Arizona. My Target is huge. Luckily, there aren't a lot of people in it ever. But I haven't noticed as many precautions, for example, in that store versus when I go to Trader Joe's. So, trying to pick and go to the stores that you can where there are more precautions being taken is also a way to reduce your exposures.
Question about cleaning supplies. So when you're at the store, what are the best cleaning supplies? What should you be looking for when you're making these purchases? Things to avoid?
So I'll comment a little bit on that one. So, the EPA has produced or issued a list. The list N is what they call it, or refer to it as. And it's a list of basically disinfectants that have been approved to kill select pathogens, including COVID-19. However, what I want to stress is that they have been approved because they are designed and are supposed to kill a virus. However, that does not mean or imply that they are safe and that they do not pose a risk to human health. I want to emphasize that. It's not like they have gone through, safety trials to make sure that they don't lead to any health outcomes. And one of the class of compounds that a lot of these agents or cleaning agents are known as quaternary ammonium compounds, or QUATs. And a lot of these compounds have been associated with, for example, skin irritation. They are respiratory irritants as well, so you need to be cautious when you use a lot of these things, especially around children who have respiratory conditions such as asthma, and even adults. And some of them have even found that in some animal studies it have been shown to be linked to reproductive effects as well. So we have to be really, really careful. And sometimes, depending on the scenario, less is more. Sometimes this kind of applies to everything, not only just for viruses and COVID, but when we're cleaning, a lot of families I found from other studies that I've done is that unless my house smells clean, it's not clean. And that's not the case, right? If you're smelling something, you're smelling that chemical, you're inhaling that chemical.
Sol.
Sorry, say that again?
It has to smell like Pines Sol, or it's not.
Of course, it has to smell like Pine Sol, or like Fabuloso, or whatever your favorite cleaning agent is. But please don't do that, that's not the case. In terms of what I've been doing at home, I try to go for the more quote-unquote organic, but obviously I know that's not always affordable for everybody. But sometimes things such as like hydrogen peroxide are sufficient. And I think it's very important that when we talk about cleaning agents is that we want to try to be really careful and not overuse and misuse them, right? Oftentimes also I've seen people dumping, the Clorox in the pail with water to then mop or whatever, when it really requires less than a capful. So we really have to read the labels, read the instructions before using any of these, especially when we have little ones at home. So,
Yeah, I think a really important thing to emphasize is there's been a huge rise in poisonings
yes.
in children and in adults associated with the misuse of chemicals during this time. So less is not more. Definitely go to that EPA list. Caitlin, and we can post that to our Facebook also. Make sure you're using a disinfectant that is rated, but follow the directions and minimize use. Like we're saying, disinfecting surfaces. We're not going out of the house, so I'm not disinfecting them more than once a day right now, if that often. My whole house gets cleaned one day a week, and then if I go to the grocery store, I'll probably, wipe everything down. I am using those quaternary ammonia wipes because I've been trying to minimize my use of them because it's hard to find them, but I do use them. When we come back from the grocery store, I'll wipe everything down once everything's put away, all of our doorknobs, our light switches. But we're not really going outside of the house for any other reason right now, so I don't have a need to do that every day, multiple times a day. Trying to keep those things to a minimum as much as possible. Hand washing whenever we can. Hand washing in soap is still way better than hand sanitizer. It's the best way to clean your hands. But, like I said, I'll put the hand sanitizer on me right before we go into the store or the bank. Trying to minimize how much of it I put on my children because we know, that their skin is a lot more easily absorbing those things, especially the little one, the toddler. But just keeping, track of those sorts of things. There have been cases of kids getting into hand sanitizer and swallowing it and ending up in the hospital. So make sure that these chemicals are locked up and put away. There's also been cases of using vinegar to clean their produce. Those two things should never be mixed. So make sure you're really careful about what chemicals and products you're mixing. Or if you're using different ones in your home, that you're not using them in the same room.
And open up windows when you're using them at home if possible.
Increasing ventilation is a great thing to do when you can. Right now it's super here in Arizona, so I open the windows in the morning until, it hits about 80, 85 degrees, and then I close up the house, but I do try to air it out whenever I can.
Great. I don't think we've received any other questions. So if there was any points that didn't come across that you guys wanted to share or you felt are important, feel free to. Not. We're all done.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Good joining.
for joining us.
We'll try these again, so let us know if there's topics people want to hear about.